Tonight on Primetime, Russia's economy is in the crosshairs as the European Union prepares its toughest sanctions yet against Moscow. This comes as Ukraine targets Russia's logistics infrastructure with drone attacks. Now, could this finally turn the scales in Ukraine's favor? Welcome to Primetime. My name is James Ezimoha. We begin with Ukraine, where Russian strikes have killed 2 people and wounded 2 others in the Donetsk region. Meanwhile, a Russian drone strike in nearby Sloviansk set a local market on fire, damaging 54 shops. The blaze spread across 2,000 square meters before crews brought it under control. Operations were then suspended over fears of more attacks. Now, Ukraine drone strikes have hit key Russian supply sites, including a major wild berries warehouse near Moscow. Russian authorities say hundreds of drones were intercepted over the weekend while the company assesses the damage. Deadly strikes have also been reported in Russia's border regions. Here's more.
Ukraine's strikes on Russia's online retailer Wildberries are increasingly affecting the country's logistics and commercial infrastructure. Sunday's large-scale drone attack on the Moscow region hit Wildberries' major warehouse in Kaledino, near Podolsk. The facility is a major distribution hub for the Russian online retailer, covering some 250,000 square meters. Wildberries says the facility was affected and that an inventory assessment is being carried out. Ukrainian strikes have targeted multiple Wildberries logistics facilities since July. Reports say at least 7 of the 10 largest logistics centers have now been hit. The attacks are therefore becoming an economic and logistical issue for Russia, disrupting deliveries, affecting thousands of sellers who are using the platform, and putting additional pressure on the country's warehouse and distribution network. On Monday, the authorities in the Belgorod region said at least 6 people were killed and 4 wounded, including a 14-year-old child, in a missile strike on the village of Kalaskova. Authorities say a building was destroyed and a car was damaged. In the Astrakhan region, a woman was killed after Ukrainian drones struck a private house, according to local authorities. Meanwhile, Russia's Ministry of Defense says its forces have taken control of Novosoloshyn in the Zaporizhzhia region and the Andreevka community in the Donetsk region. The MOD also says Russian forces struck Ukrainian logistical centers, energy and transport infrastructure used by the military, as well as assembly workshops and assembly sites for the ground systems, UAV and unmanned boats. Dasha Chernashova for AnewZ in Moscow.
Now, the EU is preparing a new round of sanctions on Russia as its foreign policy chief Kai Kallas says pressure on Moscow must keep growing until the war in Ukraine ends.
Speaking to German newspaper Die Welt, the head of the European diplomacy, Kai Kallas, said the measures planned for the autumn would be the most extensive sanctions listings since the start of the war in Ukraine. If approved, they would increase the number of sanctioned Russian entities by about a third. Kallas said existing EU sanctions had already deprived Russia's war economy of more than €1 trillion, adding that pressure should continue until Moscow ends the war. She did not provide details on the timing or specific targets of the planned measures. The EU approved its latest sanctions package in July, introducing further restrictions on Russia's banking sector and cryptocurrency networks. Since 2022, Brussels has imposed repeated sanctions targeting Russian energy, finance, trade and access to technology. The EU says the measures have reduced Russian revenues and increased pressure on the country's economy. Russian officials, however, have repeatedly said European sanctions will not achieve their intended effect. The Kremlin has also said Moscow would respond to any new EU measures in line with its national interests.
All right, let's bring in our guest, Miriam Kensurashvili, security sector reform expert, joining us from Valencia, Spain. Good to have you, ma'am.
Thank you, James, for having me.
All right, now the EU is preparing a much larger sanctions list after 21 rounds of measures. Where can Europe still find meaningful pressure on Russia's war effort?
Well, regarding sanctions, I think they still matter, but we need to really be precise of what to expect from them. Of course, I wouldn't expect Putin tomorrow to change his psychology around this war and express his willingness to negotiate just because of the sanctions. But the purpose that the sanctions serve is to prevent Russia, or rather than prevent, kind of derail it from being able to sustain economically sustain this war. What's also interesting regarding this package of sanctions is that it's interesting interaction with what President Zelensky calls the long-range sanctions, because while the EU is trying to limit Russia's technological and financial capabilities, Ukraine is directly targeting and striking military industry complex of Russia, oil refineries, etc. So this is a very interesting interaction here. However, like in my opinion, that the EU has to be quite honest with the weaknesses and inconsistencies in their approach and their sanctions architecture. As we know that a lot of European countries have significantly decreased their dependency on Russian fuel. However, we can still see some of the European goods reaching Russia through third countries and through intermediary companies. So rather than adding names, I think that more importance and more significance should be given to being able to enforce those sanctions.
All right. Now, Ukraine has now disabled 7 of Wildberry's 10 biggest hubs. Is Kyiv finding a new way to disrupt Russia's war economy from within?
Yes, Wildberries matters a lot. It's a good example because it's the largest distribution network in Russia that involves hundreds of thousands of sellers and millions of consumers, as well as millions of goods, among which we have some communications equipment, technological equipment, and some dual-use goods, which are then used by Russia's war machine. So Ukraine targeting Wildberries together with the oil refineries, airfields, and military industrial complexes is very important. And it has a psychological factor to it too, because since 2022, Putin has managed to convince his population that the war is happening somewhere there, and that it doesn't significantly relate to their personal everyday life of an ordinary Russia. What Zelensky is showing them now that no, the war is here. And it can reach very, very deep into enormous Russian territory. Another important factor here is the military factor, because with all these increasing strikes, Putin has now to make a choice. Where to put more defenses to defend their economy, airfields, Moscow, St. Petersburg. So yeah, I think that this is quite significant. It's a significant achievement by Ukraine.
Now, as you mentioned, if Ukraine keep reaching Russia's economic and logistics hub, how can Moscow then reduce the pressure without simply escalating the war?
So Ukraine pressuring the economy, Russian economy and Russian military industrial complex within, deep outside the front, of course will make Russia respond. And I think there are several possible tracks at once that Russia will take. So one would be, of course, increasing the air war. And this is very bad for Ukraine, because this is where Ukraine is the most vulnerable, because Russia has significantly more ballistic missiles than Ukraine has the high-end interceptors. Even President Zelensky recently announced that this year Ukraine has gotten only the third of the high-end interceptors that they've got in 2025. So here Ukraine remains vulnerable, and I think that when the winter approaches, we will see more and more Russian strikes on Ukrainian and energetic infrastructure, as well as continuous strikes on the civilian population. Another dimension, another track, I would say, the manpower. But here we have to be cautious, because we still don't know. Their mobilization is likely, but not inevitable. And I think before taking those steps, Putin would wait for the Duma parliamentary elections in Russia in the end of September. But this is quite possible too. Another dimension how Russia might respond would be Russia's own economic adaptation, because we can see that Russia does suffer economically from Ukrainian strikes and from the sanctions. But Russia has an amazing capability to adapt, and it has increasingly shown it to us since 2022. But this adaptation comes at a cost, and the cost will be additional reliance on China, on India, on third countries. Another what is very important for me as a Stratcoms person, that Russia will definitely increase the information manipulation, and we already see it going on, especially in the digital media these days, because there will be two audiences, internal and externals, because Putin will have to explain to his people who are asking the question, why is our state not protecting, not defending us? Why is this happening to us? We've heard it multiple times throughout this couple of months of increased Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure, especially with the fuel and the well berries. So he will need to reframe this question on why Ukraine is doing this to us. So he will try to portray Ukraine as a terroristic state who is trying to attack Russian civilians, and it will serve also an external communication purpose when he will try to increase the Western pressure on Ukraine.
All right. Sorry.
And I would also say that another thing that how Putin might react, and it's quite important, is it increasing hybrid pressure on the West, on the EU, and it could be cyber attacks, it could be information manipulation campaigns, and just sowing chaos within the European Union.
All right. Now, finally, ma'am, if sanctions keep tightening, but Russia continues fighting, what more can Europe realistically do beyond economic pressure?
The European Union has to be very firm in their unity. That's what Putin is trying to exploit with his hybrid warfare threats, with his increasingly aggressive rhetoric against the European Union. So, of course, sanctions and economic pressure is important, but Ukraine desperately needs military support. Ukraine needs air defense systems, and I would expect Europeans to be united in this and try to accommodate Ukraine's needs as soon as possible.
All right, thank you. That was welcome back. You're still watching Primetime. Now, U.S. envoy Jared Kushner has met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to withdraw troops from Gaza and revive Washington's stalled peace plan. The push comes just weeks after Netanyahu dismissed President Trump's latest roadmap as unacceptable. Earlier in his regional tour, Kushner held talks with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Meanwhile, Hamas officials have also met with Egypt's intelligence chief, even as Israeli airstrikes on the Strip continue. Now, Pakistan and 7 other Muslim countries are condemning Israel's rejection of a U.S.-backed roadmap for ending the Gaza war. They are calling for Washington to ensure the plan is implemented. Here's more from AnewZ.
Pakistan has joined Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE in rejecting Israel's opposition to a proposed roadmap for ending the war in Gaza. In a joint statement, the 8 countries described Israel's position as a direct rejection of the comprehensive plan, warning that it could hinder efforts to implement the roadmap and reach what they called a just and lasting peace. They also said Israel would bear responsibility for obstructing efforts to advance a political settlement in Gaza. The roadmap was developed through mediation by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, and has been accepted by Palestinian factions. It calls for the disarmament of armed groups, an Israeli military withdrawal, and the deployment of an international stabilization force, Palestinian administration, and reconstruction. The broader US comprehensive plan was announced in September 2025 and later endorsed by the UN Security Council through Resolution 2803. Israel has rejected the roadmap, while 8 countries are calling for continued US engagement to help secure its implementation. AnewZ, AnewZ, Islamabad.
All right, let's talk to Hamza Azhar Salam, editor at the Pakistan Daily, joining us from Lahore, Pakistan. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now Kushner went to Cairo and met Hamas and regional mediators. Then he traveled to Jerusalem. What do you think Washington is testing through this sequence of talks?
Well, Washington is testing what it would take for Israel to accept this peace plan. We saw that Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu categorically stated that the 15-point peace plan was not acceptable to him. And then we saw Jared Kushner fly first to Egypt and then to Israel. The meeting just took place. And I think the Americans are trying to gauge Netanyahu's calculus. And it also appears that the elections in October have a bearing on Israel's policy towards the framework for peace. So I do think the Americans are making their calculations right now.
All right, now after the Cairo talks, do we have any reason to think Hamas has moved further on disarmament, or is Washington still asking for the same commitment?
Well, it's still a very precarious situation because both sides, the Israelis and Hamas, want the other side to fold first. So Hamas is prepared to do disarmament after Israeli forces leave Gaza, and this is the deadlock which has now taken place, and the Board of Peace is actively trying to bridge these two sides and to end this deadlock. Pakistan has also played a role in this. Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, these nations are trying very hard to bring both the Israeli side and Hamas on the same page, but it's unclear whether Hamas will be prepared to do disarmament before the Israeli withdrawal.
Yeah, we'll get to the role of Pakistan and other mediators in a short while, but right now, rather than relying entirely on Egypt and Qatar to carry messages, US officials are now hearing the positions firsthand. Could that direct contact actually give Washington greater leverage?
Well, absolutely. This was a very high-level engagement by Jared Kushner. He met Sisi in Egypt. He also met the Hamas leaders. So I think it shows that the Americans are using such high-level engagements to get to know the other side better, to understand their concerns, to understand their exact position, at this stage of time and to understand what exactly could make a lasting peace work. Now, President Trump has initiated the Board of Peace with the stated goal of bringing peace in Gaza, and such engagement shows that this is a realistic plan
Now,
to ensure lasting peace.
thank you. Now, in your opinion, why is Washington investing so much political effort in this roadmap when Hamas and Israel remain so far apart?
Well, it looks like the Trump administration's strategy of trying to initiate peace in global conflicts. Earlier, we saw the Trump administration played a role in establishing peace between Pakistan and India last year. It played a role in establishing peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. President Trump has repeatedly stated that he is trying to end conflicts across the world. So I think that it talks to President Trump's own domestic priorities and how he positions himself to his own people. He calls himself a man of peace, and this is why peace in Gaza is so important to him.
Now, speaking about being a man of peace, Netanyahu has rejected the roadmap from the from the man of peace, yet Washington is still pushing it. What do you think is his calculation by resisting the U.S. position at the moment?
Well, I think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a very precarious spot at the moment, and the October elections will determine his political future. Currently, according to most of the polls, he is not leading, he is the runner up. So he has to save face for his domestic audiences, and such a deal in which he withdraws forces from Gaza uses a lot of political capital, which Prime Minister Netanyahu may not have to spend just weeks before the October elections. So I think that his main priority is to secure his government, his prime ministership in October, and then become a part of and agree with President Trump's peace plan.
Now, 8 Muslim countries have now taken a joint position. Does this create a new political environment for the talks or mainly reinforce positions that were already clear?
Well, I think this does reinforce the Muslim world's opinion and diplomatic effort on this issue. We also saw the United Arab Emirates, which is a signatory of the Abraham Accords, also join these 8 nations in this condemnation, which shows how even voices within the Muslim world which allied with Israel are not agreeing with its current strategy in regards to Gaza. And it's very difficult to get all these countries on one page together on any platform, but Israel is providing that very unique opportunity for these Muslim countries to come together. So I do think that together they have a lot of leverage, and they will have an impact on the future outcome, whatever happens in Gaza.
All right, speaking about leverage, Egypt has direct channels to Hamas and also close ties with Palestinian leadership. How much influence can Cairo actually bring to these talks?
Well, we saw Jared Kushner meeting the Hamas leadership in Egypt. So it is definitely a venue where high-level engagements can take place. We can see other senior members of the Trump administration also use the Egyptian channel to expand their communication and engagement with the Hamas leadership. So I think this is a very important channel, but it is not the only one. Qatar is also very relevant in this geopolitical chessboard. They have great terms with Washington, and they could also be used for many elements of Hamas. So it all depends on how the Americans want to play this. And I do feel that the October election is the recurring theme in this entire process. Before there is a roadmap ahead for Israel, all these efforts will maybe remain meaningless.
Thank you. That was Hamza Azar Salam, editor at the Pakistan Daily, join us from Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
All right, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to Primetime. Now, travelers between Britain and mainland Europe could have a new alternative to Eurostar from 2030. Now, if you're asking how that's going to happen, well, Virgin Trains have overcome another regulatory hurdle to launch cross-channel services. The move could bring greater competition to market Eurostar has dominated for more than 3 decades. A correspondent reports from Manchester.
Britain's Virgin Trains is set to challenge Eurostar's long-standing dominance of passenger rail through the Channel Tunnel, potentially giving travellers more choice and cheaper fares between the UK and mainland Europe. The British company has been given approval by the UK rail regulator to run up to 20 daily return services from London to Paris, Brussels and Amsterdam. Eurostar is a high-speed rail operator connecting Britain with mainland Europe and has been the only passenger train company using the Channel Tunnel since 1994. But passengers will have to wait. Virgin's access to the railway network does not begin until October 2030, and it still needs access to European rail networks and safety approvals from regulators in Britain and the EU. The decision is another step forward for the project. Last October, Virgin was granted access to Eurostar's Temple Mills depot in East London, which is directly connected to High Speed 1, the railway linking London with the Channel Tunnel. Virgin says it plans to invest around £700 million in the project and create about 400 jobs. Its trains will run from London St Pancras to the same 3 European cities served by Eurostar. And there could be more competition. Trenitalia France has applied to run 10 daily return services between London and Paris from 2029, while startups Evelyn and Gemini Trains have also proposed international services. Virgin founder Sir Richard Branson has called for an end to Eurostar's 30-year monopoly and hopes to restore direct trains from London to Disneyland Paris. If the plans go ahead, passengers could eventually have more choice and potentially lower fares when traveling between Britain and mainland Europe. Zena Farizadeh, AnewZ, Manchester, United Kingdom.
All right, now Iran says it will hold Qatar responsible for 3 missing fighter pilots unless their fate is clarified. Tehran also says the Iran-US ceasefire deal, which expired today, by the way, was never fully carried out after what it calls violations from the start.
Iran says it is in contact with Qatari officials over the fate of 3 Air Force pilots who have been missing since their fighter jets were down during the early days of the conflict with Israel and the United States in March. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said Tehran has not concluded that the pilots were killed during a mission targeting US bases in Qatar and is seeking information to establish their status. Baghai also criticized regional countries for allowing US forces to use their territory and airspace during the conflict. On Iran-US relations, the spokesman said a memorandum signed on 17th of June, which provided for negotiations toward a longer-term ceasefire, had been violated by the US soon after it was agreed. He said planned talks on sanctions relief and the nuclear issue did not take place after US attacks resumed. Baghai said Iran would not make decisions based on deadlines or pressures, but according to its national interest and security. He also said Iran and Oman have agreed on a navigation route through the Strait of Hormuz and are working on a joint statement covering the arrangements. Turaj Shiralilu from Iranian Foreign Ministry for AnewZ.
All right, now India's education system is facing a new student-led protest movement, this time in the east of the country. The so-called cockroach movement is now calling for audits of state-run schools and wider reform, but the campaign organizers say authorities are pushing back. Here's more.
The latest student agitation is taking place hundreds of kilometers away from New Delhi. It's happening in the eastern Indian state of Jharkhand. It's one of India's poorest regions. And there for 3 weeks, thousands of students have been camped out in the capital city of Ranchi. Many have been on a hunger strike. The protest started after 2 exams for state government jobs saw alleged irregularities, including reported leaks. Now, the state government there, ruled by an alliance of parties opposed to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, have held multiple talks with protesters, and while most demands have been accepted, they are yet to accept the demand to allow a federal police team to probe these alleged irregularities. Experts say this will pull in Mr. Modi's federal administration, and the opposition party in power wants to avoid that. But over the weekend, protests intensified and demonstrators burned effigies of the chief minister there. They threatened to surround his residence, and now the local government is holding another round of talks with students to try and end this impasse. Now, Mr. Modi's party has criticized the local government's handling of this entire issue. For the Prime Minister's party, this comes just weeks after it was his party and government at the receiving end of a similar public protest, which was led by the Cockroach Janata Party here in New Delhi. The protest, which only ended after Mr. Modi's education minister resigned over an exam leak scandal, became the biggest show of dissent against Mr. Modi's rule. Now, the Cockroach movement has taken its entire movement to the grassroots by carrying out an audit of all state-run schools. They want to expose, they say, how poorly funded these schools are and how millions of children lack access to even basic amenities like clean toilets, electricity, or even teaching staff. But they allege that Mr. Modi's party is trying to prevent them from putting a spotlight on this issue in the state of Rajasthan. That region is ruled by Mr. Modi's party, and the government there has now issued an order prohibiting the unauthorized entry of outsiders. It says live streaming of school premises is also not allowed. The Cockroach movement has called this, quote, a cowardly order, saying its workers are ready to defy the order and face arrest, but this will not stop them, they say, from inspecting schools in that state and ensuring that schools are fixed immediately. Neha Punia, for AnewZ, New Delhi.
Now, a new wave of transport investment is reshaping trade routes across Central Asia, with billions of dollars going into links between Asia and Europe. Much of it is focused on the Middle Corridor, which could boost the region's role as a key trade link. Severa Japova reports from Tashkent.
Central Asia is undergoing a major transport expansion, with $71.7 billion being channeled into 114 ongoing and planned projects across the region, according to the Eurasian Development Bank's 2026 Transport Observatory. Kazakhstan is the largest recipient, accounting for 45% of total investment. That is around $32 billion. Much of the investment is focused on the Trans-Second network, including the Trans-Caspian International Transport Road, better known as the Middle Corridor. The road has attracted around $42.8 billion in investment and is designed to connect Central Asia with the Caspian region, the South Caucasus, and Europe, providing an alternative trade route between China and European markets. China is also a major investor, with more than $12 billion going into transport projects across Central Asia. The largest individual project is the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, valued at around $4.7 billion. International financial institutions are also supporting regional connectivity. The European Union has allocated $10 billion for further Middle Corridor development, while Kazakhstan and the Asian Development Bank have agreed on a framework covering 15 projects worth around $5.4 billion through 2029. Roads account for 56% of regional transport investment, while railway make up almost 30%. The scale of investment is strengthening Central Asia's role as a major transit hub and an increasingly important link between Asian and European markets. Severa Japova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, AnewZ.
After the break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Prime Time. Now, Iran's military has announced a new reward for the killing or capture of U.S. servicemen as the Middle East conflict continues. Army Commander-in-Chief Amir Hatami unveiled the scheme in Tehran. He says the $30,000 initiative followed requests from Iranians seeking to support the military through what he called financial jihad, adding that sum would double if conducted by a woman. It hasn't been specified how the scheme would work, and there is no known deployment of U.S. forces currently on the ground inside Iran.
Whoever, any dear combatant of ours, kills an American or captures one and hands them over to any of the units of the Islamic Republic of Iran Army, supported by those dear individuals who wish to participate in financial jihad, but under the guarantee of the army, alongside the great reward of the jihad, we will provide a proper gift. This gift is equivalent to $30,000, approximately 5 billion tomans.
All right, now the death toll from a powerful earthquake in eastern Indonesia has risen to 53, with Flores Island among the worst hit areas. Rescue teams are still searching for survivors as authorities assess the damage from the 7.7 magnitude quake.
Rescue workers sifted through collapsed buildings and landslide debris on Sunday, searching for bodies and possible survivors a day after the powerful earthquake. Officials from Indonesia's disaster agency said more than 900 homes were destroyed and another 450 damaged, forcing around 5,000 residents into emergency shelters. At least 167 public facilities, including schools, healthcare centers, and churches, were also damaged. Near the epicenter, medical and military personnel treated injured survivors in makeshift tents after the local hospital was heavily damaged. For survivors, the earthquake struck without warning, leaving little time to escape.
When it shook, I felt I was spinning. I didn't have the chance to get up. Just as I was about to get up, rocks fell on me, on my head, my legs. I had my 2 kids with me, and we were all buried under rubble. We were then evacuated by someone.
Another survivor described being trapped inside her room as the building collapsed around her.
I just woke up, and when the quake happened, my entire room started collapsing, and I was trapped in my room. I focused on covering my head, so my legs and body were crushed by the quake. Only when it was safe was I able to crawl out.
Emergency teams continued searching for villagers feared trapped beneath earthquake-triggered landslides across 6 regencies on Flores, a predominantly Catholic island in Muslim-majority Indonesia. Aid workers began distributing rice, ready-to-eat meals, drinking water, blankets, and medical supplies, while emergency shelters were set up for people who lost their homes. Restoring electricity and communications, as well as reaching remote communities cut off by landslides, remained among the main challenges for authorities. The European Union has expressed solidarity with Indonesia and said it is ready to support search and rescue efforts. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU was prepared to activate the Copernicus Earth Observation Service, providing satellite data to help Indonesian authorities assess the damage and direct rescue teams to areas most in need.
All right, and the earthquake toll is still being counted in Colombia, where a powerful quake struck last week. At least 289 people have been killed and more than 4,000 were injured in the 7.5 magnitude earthquake. Colombia's disaster agency says more than 140 people are still missing, while more than 350 have been rescued. The quake has affected more than 120,000 families, according to authorities. The latest death toll is 5 lower than the previous figure, but no reason was given for the change. Now, residents in Hawaii were assessing the aftermath of Lala on Sunday after the storm battered the island chain over the weekend. Officials urged people to remain cautious as recovery operations got underway.
Fallen trees, flooded roads and damaged power lines were reported across Hawaii after Lala passed close to the islands without making landfall. PowerOutage.us said nearly 130,000 customers were without electricity early on Sunday, mostly on the Big Island, Oahu and Maui.
We haven't had electricity all night, so I just wanted to get out here and kind of assess for myself what's going on. It's been a pretty challenging experience, just trying to, all these trees are down with on top of wires, so we're just hoping emergency crews get to us and help us out a little bit.
Authorities reported one death in a car-related incident, while the National Weather Service said 2 homes had been swept away. Hawaiian Electric said strong winds, heavy rain and blocked roads were hampering efforts to restore power. Lala reached Category 1 hurricane strength on Saturday, with maximum sustained winds of 120 kilometers per hour, before weakening to a tropical storm. The National Hurricane Center warned that life-threatening conditions remained possible, with up to 20 centimeters of further rain forecast for the Big Island and windward Maui. Total rainfall in some areas could approach 90 centimeters since the storm began affecting Hawaii late on Friday. Hilo and Kona international airports were closed on Saturday, with state officials saying they were expected to reopen on Sunday and advising passengers to check with their airlines.
At least 7 people have been killed in a stampede at a temple in India's Bihar state. Police say a falling power pole may have caused panic among worshippers. The stampede happened as devotees gathered to offer water to the Hindu god Shiva during the holy month of Shravan. Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered condolences on X and said local officials were helping those affected. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the Pentagon to cut back its annual military exercises with South Korea just as they were about to begin. He cited the cost of the drills, South Korea's refusal to take part in the current action against Iran, and the improving relations between Washington and Pyongyang.
Just hours before the US and South Korea were to begin joint military exercises, US President Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to substantially reduce 10 days of annual drills. In a post on Truth Social, Trump linked the decision to the cost of the exercises. He also said that, although it was somewhat unrelated, South Korea had declined a request to join US efforts to denuclearize Iran. Trump added that it was too late to cancel the drills altogether, but that he had instructed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce them. The Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises begins on Monday as scheduled and are due to run until the 27th of August. Around 18,000 South Korean troops are expected to participate. The drills are designed to prepare for North Korea's evolving military capabilities, including drone attacks, GPS disruption, and cyber threats. Trump also pointed to his relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, raising speculation that the move could be aimed at improving ties with Pyongyang. North Korea regularly condemns the drills as preparations for an invasion. The country launched 2 ballistic missiles earlier this month, most recently last Wednesday, when it fired one from its eastern coast towards the Sea of Japan. Trump and Kim have had a volatile relationship over the years, despite holding 3 summits. Their meetings did not result in changes to North Korea's nuclear weapons or ballistic missile programs.
Now, Spain says thousands of stranded migrants in Ceuta will be barred from traveling to the EU. The decision has sparked fierce protests across the North African enclave, with demonstrators declaring they are being unlawfully stripped of their legal rights to claim European asylum.
Hundreds of migrants have demonstrated in Ceuta,
a Spanish enclave on the North African coast, following a mass arrival from Morocco 2 weeks ago. More than 72,000 people entered the territory by land or sea. Most later returned voluntarily, but an estimated 5,000 to 8,000 remain.
We are waiting for asylum because people from other countries who are here get asylum. Why is it only that Moroccans who can't get asylum? Why is it only Moroccans? What fault do we have?
Many of the Moroccans said low wages and limited job opportunities had pushed them to make the dangerous journey, despite some holding professional qualifications. They are now hoping to work in Europe and travel onwards to mainland Spain.
We are truly suffering. We are sleeping next to the sea, with cold, with bad smell. We are suffering a lot. The police doesn't let us go downtown. They always kick us out.
Ceuta's limited resources have been stretched by the arrivals, leaving authorities struggling to provide accommodation and essential services. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska said those who entered irregularly would not be allowed to remain in the enclave, travel to mainland Spain, or obtain legal status, except in rare cases involving extreme vulnerability.
All right, it's been a pleasure bringing you Primetime tonight. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.